Aloha, folks, and welcome to this latest edition of Five Questions, heard right here on News Radio, 830 KHVH, and also on HawaiiReporter.com. Be sure and log on every day. Our guest this morning, as of right now for Five Questions, is Lindsay Burke. She's Senior Policy Analyst with the Heritage Foundation out of Washington, D.C. And Lindsay, we wish you aloha and good talking to you. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
Have you had a chance to come out and visit us in Hawaii before?
You know, I have once. It was a couple of years ago, and it was just a beautiful experience.
Ah, tremendous. Whereabouts was it on Oahu or?
It was on the Big Island.
On the Big Island. Oh, I love the Big Island.
It was wonderful.
Good for you. That's awesome. Well, listen, we're very thankful that you're with us. We have some Q&A regarding the president and his recent statements regarding No Child Left Behind. The president said in his opening comments, it's time to make the American education system the envy of the world. That was the premise of his statement. So question number one would be, since he wants to make changes, could you define No Child Left Behind for us? And also, what's your assessment of the policy and the effect it's had on education in America?
Sure. Well, No Child Left Behind is actually the 8th reauthorization of the original 1965 law, which was known then as the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It was passed under President Johnson at the time and was part of his Great Society program. And at the time, the idea was, under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the idea was to provide compensatory education, so to spend some additional federal dollars through federal programs to try and improve outcomes for low-income children. Mm-hmm. But what we saw over the years with nearly every reauthorization, and as the federal government grew, we saw that idea of compensatory education morph into Washington becoming involved in systemic education. And basically that has meant now that no aspect of school policy is off limits to Washington. And so by 2001, we saw No Child Left Behind come into being. And No Child Left Behind, among many problems that permeate the law, one of the major problems is this 2014 proficiency deadline. So by 2014, all children have to be proficient in reading and math under No Child Left Behind. And while that is certainly a laudable goal, it's a little bit utopian in the sense that you're always going to have children that don't do their homework. And this idea that the federal government, the bureaucrats in Washington, are well-equipped to set proficiency goals and really dictate proficiency metrics on states, I think is really misguided. So now you have an effort to start reforming that and in some cases even completely rolling it back.
The reaction, question number two would be the reaction to the president making changes. Has there been enough specificity to what the president would like to do? And what's your impression of circumventing a legislative process when, in fact, we're talking about a federal law?
Right. Well, I think there actually has been a good amount of specificity in the sense that these waivers are not just waivers in the sense that they will give relief to states to get out from under some of the onerous provisions. But these are waivers that come with strings attached, that come with conditions. And we have an idea now of what those conditions are. But this idea that the administration can circumvent Congress and provide states with waivers to the law that have conditions attached to them is really problematic. And it really gets to the heart of the matter of the problems with NCLB. I think that both sides of the aisle agree that No Child Left Behind is broken. But the Obama administration does not believe that the federal role in education is fundamentally flawed. And conservatives believe that, in fact, it is flawed and that you will never get effective education reform from Washington. Now, conservatives in Congress have been working on a very thoughtful process to consider the future of No Child Left Behind. The Education and the Workforce Committee has put forward several bills as alternatives to No Child Left Behind, as alternatives, and they've also been holding hearings over the past year. So Congress is going through a pretty thoughtful process. Well, the Obama administration decided that, for all intents and purposes, time was up on that process and decided to begin issuing these waivers and decided to effectively circumvent Congress by attaching conditions to these waivers. So if a state wants some relief and seeks a waiver, they have to agree to new policy. So the administration is pushing through new policy without congressional approval, and for their part, states ultimately will be getting some short-term relief in exchange for some long-term handcuffs.
The bottom line, though, it really is at the school level, the classroom level, and I'd just like to get your take on this, that if No Child Left Behind, many of us thought the imposition of this by President Bush was an acknowledgement that states have desired the autonomy to implement their own education systems, even to the point of curriculum in great detail. But if we assess on a global level where the United States falls in proficiency, that we've been slipping over generations. So if No Child is not the catalyst for that change for an improved education, then what truly is?
Right. And, American students, you're absolutely right. They rank in the middle of the pack compared to their international peers. We are certainly not competitive internationally, or as competitive as we should be. But the idea that more federal involvement is the answer to making us the envy of the world once again in terms of K-12 education, I think is pretty misguided. We will not correct the continual federal overreaches that we've seen over the past 4.5 decades with more federal overreach. What we need to start doing is really start to devolve dollars and decision-making back down to the state and local level, where there is competition among standards, where there is competition for good ideas. We know that states have the capacity to improve educational outcomes. We have seen this in Florida, which was at the bottom of the pack in terms of academic achievement just over a decade ago, now ranks about 5th in the country, and they did that through common sense state-level reforms. Mm-hmm. They did that despite No Child Left Behind, not because of it. Mm-hmm. We're seeing states like Massachusetts that, unlike much of the rest of the nation, has among the highest standards in the world. And, of course, states like Indiana and California have very strong standards. So we know states have the capacity, and there are certainly states that do not perform very well and have a lot of room for improvement. But what we do know, without a shadow of a doubt, is that the federal government has been wholly incapable at improving academic outcomes. So we have pockets of excellence in the states across the country, and we have failure on the part of the federal government. So we need to start returning more fiscal and curricular control, educational control in general, back down to the state level and really start to get Washington out of it.
We're talking with Lindsay Burke, this edition of 5 Questions, which could actually morph into about 43 questions because of our topicality here. She's a senior policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation. Before we continue, Lindsay, can you tell us about the Heritage Foundation a little bit, please?
Sure. Well, the Heritage Foundation is a nonprofit think tank, a public policy institute, and we deal with a wide range of issues, education being the issue in which I deal, but we also deal with everything ranging from energy policy to first principles and family and religion issues. So it runs the gamut here, and really pride ourselves in providing good conservative alternatives, educating members of Congress and educating the public on these conservative alternatives.
And how about a website address?
Sure, we're at www.heritage.org.
Lindsay, question number 4 is pretty much to carry through with your last response. And if we do identify that the federal government should not intervene, nor should they have such great sway with states, then what role, if any, should the federal government play in public education?
Well, I think falling back on the words of Milton Friedman is always a good idea. Mm-hmm. And Milton mm-hmm. Friedman said that just because we have agreed as a society that we have agreed to the public financing of education does not mean that we believe that government should control schools. And that's kind of the point that we're at right now. We have a system, and this goes beyond just federal involvement, but we have a system of education on the K-12 level that says that you as a parent, we are going to assign your child to a public school based on your zip code. We're going to give them very little choice in the matter. We really need to start rethinking the entire system, from federal involvement down to how we assign children to schools. We need a system that is far more flexible, more market-based, that really starts to get to this idea of mass customization for children. So instead of funding physical school buildings, we need to start funding the child instead and allowing the money we spend on them for their education to follow them to any school of their choice. And this is ultimately something that states need to do, but for their part, the federal government can start pulling off some of the red tape for states and can start to give states flexibility with federal funding to spend it on any education priority of their choice. And if a state decides to put that towards school choice initiatives, then that's a good direction for a state to go. But again, we have seen failure on the part of Washington to be able to improve outcomes. We have seen Washington per pupil expenditures nearly triple since the 1970s after adjusting for inflation. And yet academic achievement has remained flat. Graduation rates are the same today that they were in the 1970s. And we still have an achievement gap between students. So, we really need to start rethinking how the federal government interacts with states and how the federal government funds and oversees education. The federal government is only a 10% stakeholder in education. States and localities pay for 90% of the cost of educating children. And today, the federal government's share far exceeds that 10% stake that they have. So we need to start putting power back in the hands of states and localities, and I think ultimately that's where we'll see the improvements come from.
We have a unique situation here in Hawaii because our public education system is a state-run system. We don't have local school boards or local municipalities. The funding is derived out of the state general fund, and we dedicate the lion's share of our general fund budget to education. We've seen an exponential rise in the amount per student that we're quote-unquote investing, yet we languish at some of the bottom of the list when it comes to performance. So it's that disconnect, again, between investment and performance that we're struggling with here at home, and what you've just described evidently across the country as well. So the bottom line is the bottom line, Lindsay. Money does not equal excellence. So if it's not a cash issue, what do we need to do to instill a little bit of hope for parents that are looking at this behemoth and going, how am I going to make sure my kids are as prepared as possible?
Yeah, and we know that spending has little to no correlation with academic achievement. And conversely, we know that giving families control over the dollars that we spend has everything to do with academic achievement. You were using great market-based words like investment earlier, and I think that's really what the education system across the country, Hawaii is no exception, really needs. It needs a little bit of market infusion. You have a system whereby public schools know that no matter how poorly they perform, they will continue to get a steady flow of students because of the way in which we fund education. Again, we fund the school building. We don't fund the child.
Right.
So they really have no incentive to improve.
Right.
We need to empower parents with control over their share of their child's educational dollars to attend any school of their choice, public, private, homeschool, virtual, or otherwise. You name it, we think it should be an option. And I think that will ultimately put a little much-needed competitive pressure on the public school system. We know in states across the country that when there are more school choice options, we also see the public schools improve at the same time. There are exciting new school choice opportunities out there. Arizona just enacted education savings accounts, and Utah is considering doing the same. So there are many options, tuition tax credit programs, voucher programs. There are many options that states could start to pursue.
Right.
And I think, as the Wall Street Journal said, 2011 has been the year of school choice, and I think we're only going to see that proliferate next year.
Wow. You mentioned utopia before. I mean, I would love for the opportunity as a parent of two children in elementary school to be able to have that option, have self-direction, and make the choices that we think are best for our kids' education. We've had that experience in our family where we've experienced private school and now public school, and to have that self-direction is so important and would be so desirable. But as soon as you mention any type of voucher program or anything, the usual suspects come out in force, whether it be teachers' unions or government itself, and they counter your argument with literally the opposite, which is you are detrimentally going to hurt and affect public education, thereby sacrificing children who don't have the opportunity to make a choice, and you're going to take away from that public system.
And they are interested in maintaining the system. They are worried about public education and the system and the jobs that it kind of encapsulates.
Right.
We are worried about ensuring that every child has access to a quality education. It is not about physical school buildings. It's about access to education. And when you empower parents with the money that is their money, their taxpayer dollars, and you allow them to make choices that are in their child's best interest, we know about the powerful impact that can have.
Yeah.
Parents are rational consumers. They seek out what is in the best interest of their child, and education is no exception.
Amen. Lindsay, I'm going to announce that you're moving here to Hawaii to head up our education initiative. So,
well, the weather's much better than here in D.C., so.
Before we go, and this is literally question number 12, but which education systems are succeeding globally? And is there anything that we could emulate, perhaps, and take away from countries that are implementing a very successful education program?
You know, some of the countries that we know are successful are countries that are moving toward more decentralization, as we're moving toward more centralization of education. So I think that's something to keep in the back of our minds. But you look at a country like Sweden, which is no bastion of conservatism, and
True.
yet Sweden has been able to implement a universal school choice program. And Sweden, of course, felt pushback in the 90s from their government unions, from their teachers' unions, but eventually they actually won them over, and now the unions are even on the side of school choice there. So I think we have a lot to learn from other countries. You know, there are many countries that have focused on really returning to core subjects and to making sure that teachers are proficient in the content in which they're teaching, that they don't just have a teaching degree, which we know has little correlation with your ability to improve student outcomes, that they're really well-versed in the content that they teach and that they are rewarded when they're able to increase student achievement. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other countries, not the least of which is a move towards school choice and a move toward decentralization.
How about another invitation to see you at the Heritage Foundation, please?
That would be wonderful.
Be sure and join Lindsay Burke. You can log on, and may I have the website address again?
It's www.heritage.org.
And Lindsay is a senior policy analyst specializing in education. And I've been on the site. You can click on, send messages, and read with regularity what Lindsay has for us. Well, listen, sorry about the Redskins the other night. And
no worries.
And we thank you for your time today and hope we can do it again.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.